Chicago winters were harsh and gray. Maggie Reynolds sat in her small condo, wrapped in a warm sweater, holding a hot cup of coffee. She stared out the window at the snow piling up on the streets below. Her apartment was quiet, and the soft hum of the heater was the only sound. She wore a plain gray suit, her shoulder-length hair neatly brushed, and just a touch of makeup. To anyone else, she looked like just another office worker getting ready for a normal day. But the truth of Maggie's life was far more complicated. On the table in front of her were stacks of paperwork, business documents that she had been reading through all morning. She was deep in thought when a knock came at the door. Mail delivery. Sam, the building manager, called. "Thanks, Sam," she replied. She went to the door, picked up the bundle of envelopes, and sat back down. As she flipped through the mail, one envelope stood out right away. It was pastel blue, with elegant handwriting on the back. "Let's celebrate Vanessa and Michael's baby." Maggie sighed. Of course, it was a baby shower invitation from her younger sister, Vanessa. She opened the envelope and read the details. The shower was set for next Saturday at a fancy country club in the suburbs. The host was their mother, Eleanor. A small note was tucked inside, written in her mother's familiar handwriting. "Please come, it's an important family day." Maggie stared at the words for a long moment, then looked back out the window. Memories began to swirl in her mind, memories of how she had always been the dependable older daughter. While Maggie studied hard and worked jobs to put herself through college, Vanessa partied, dated, and got all the attention. Their mother had always said, "Vanessa's special, she's full of charm." The ringing of Maggie's phone broke her thoughts. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. Maggie sighed and answered. "Good morning, Mom." "Maggie, did you get the invitation? Isn't it lovely?" Eleanor's voice was cheerful, but as always, it had a controlling edge. "I just opened it," Maggie replied flatly. "Wonderful, everyone's going to be there. It's such a special time for Vanessa. You'll come, right?" It wasn't really a question, it was a demand. "I'll come, but I have work, so I'll come in the morning and head back that night." "Oh, don't be silly, stay the night. Your bedroom's just like you left it." "I'll stay at a hotel, Mom. It's easier for me." Eleanor gave a disappointed sigh. "You're always working, at least get a good gift. Vanessa only wants the best." "I know," Maggie said quietly. After the call, Maggie leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Talking to her mother always left her feeling tired and small. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, covering the city like a blanket. That night, Maggie walked to a door at the back of her apartment. She changed out of her plain work clothes and into soft, silk pajamas. She held a glass of red wine in her hand as she stepped into a hidden room, her study. The inside looked nothing like the rest of the apartment. Huge monitors lined the walls, all showing charts, stock prices, and business news. A glass desk held high-end computers and tablets. A world map on the wall was covered in red pins. This wasn't a space for a regular office worker. This was the nerve center of a business empire. Maggie sat at the desk and opened her laptop. The screen read, "Reynolds Technologies, Quarterly Report." She took a sip of wine and typed, "Jason, prepare a list of potential companies we can buy. I'll be away next week. Only contact me for an emergency." A calm digital voice responded, "Understood. How are your preparations for the baby shower?" Maggie smirked. "I'm preparing for a perfect performance, for Mom and Vanessa." She reached into a drawer and took out a velvet box. Inside was a sparkling diamond necklace. It was already wrapped, with a card that read, "To Vanessa." She stared at it for a moment before finishing her wine in silence. The country club in Lake Forest was grand and elegant. White pillars, large windows, and snow-covered trees surrounded it. Maggie parked her car and checked her reflection in the mirror. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, but made from the finest fabric. She opened her handbag, checked the gift box, and took a deep breath. "Maggie, is that you?" her mother called from the entrance. Eleanor stood there in a bright pink dress, smiling widely. Her hair and makeup were flawless, as always. "Hi, Mom," Maggie said, forcing a smile as they hugged briefly. "You're late, everyone's already inside. You're the last to arrive." Eleanor looked Maggie up and down and frowned. Something brighter would have been better. "It's a party, after all." Maggie didn't reply, she just followed her mother inside. The private room was decorated with soft blue balloons and white flowers. Vanessa sat in the center, glowing and 8 months pregnant. She looked like the guest of honor at a royal banquet. Big sis, Vanessa called with a wave. You made it. Maggie smiled and walked over. Congratulations, she said gently, handing her the small gift box. Vanessa opened it, and the room gasped. The necklace inside sparkled like stars. It's stunning, Vanessa said. Then she tilted her head. But it's not a baby gift. I brought something for the baby too, Maggie said calmly, but I wanted to give something special to you, as the mom-to-be. Eleanor suddenly appeared at her side. Maggie, come meet James. Vanessa's husband, James, was tall and serious-looking. He shook Maggie's hand and squinted slightly. Nice to meet you, Maggie. Vanessa's told me a lot about you. Hopefully good things, Maggie said politely. James tilted his head. Have we met before? You seem familiar. Maggie quickly answered. I don't think so. I'm bad with faces. Maybe you are too. James still looked uncertain, but Vanessa pulled him away, ending the conversation. The party carried on, guests chatting, laughing, sipping champagne. Maggie stayed near the edge of the room, sipping quietly from her glass. Maggie, why are you always off to the side? Eleanor approached again. Mingle more. This is why you're still single. No social skills. Maggie stayed calm. I'm busy, Mom, that's all. Busy with what? Your little office job? Vanessa's the one who's really living life, with a baby and a loving husband. We all choose different paths, Mom. Yes, but yours is clearly the wrong one, Eleanor said before walking away. Maggie's fingers tightened around her glass. Old memories surfaced. She remembered how Eleanor skipped her graduation for Vanessa's cold. How she was asked to pay Vanessa's tuition after their father died. How Vanessa was always comforted and praised, while Maggie was told to be strong and responsible. Vanessa's voice brought her back. Big sis, can I ask you something? Maggie turned slowly. Vanessa's tone was sweet but familiar. She always spoke that way before asking for a favor. After the baby's born, I want to go back to work quickly. Can you take care of the baby a few days a week? Maggie blinked. Vanessa, I live downtown and work full-time. I get home late. That would be hard. But we're sisters, Vanessa said, as if that solved everything. Before Maggie could reply, Eleanor stood up with a microphone. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this special celebration, she said, beaming. People clapped. Maggie stepped back, watching from the corner. I have a special announcement, Eleanor continued. Her face glowed with excitement. To support Vanessa during this new chapter, the Reynolds family has decided to help cover the expenses of childbirth and care. She glanced directly at Maggie. And Maggie, Vanessa's loving sister, will be covering the medical costs. The room applauded. Maggie stood frozen. Her hands were cold. Her mother had never asked her. She had just announced it. No, Maggie said softly. She turned to get her bag, but before she could take another step, her mother Eleanor suddenly stepped forward and slapped her across the face. A loud gasp spread through the room. The sound of the slap echoed in the air, and everyone froze. Maggie held her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. Her face burned, not just from the hit, but from the pain of being struck by her own mother, in front of so many people. Mom, Maggie whispered, her voice shaking. Eleanor's eyes were full of anger. Get out, she snapped. You're a disgrace to this family. Maggie looked around. Most people avoided her eyes. Some looked away, pretending not to have seen anything. Only one person met her gaze, James. He looked at her with sympathy and understanding. He didn't look away. Just then, Vanessa stood up. Her voice was cold and mocking. Still stingy, even with all that money. No husband, no kids. What's the point of all your success? She gave a cruel laugh. You worked all your life and ended up with nothing. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. She had lived her whole life trying to be accepted by her family. She had hidden her real identity, keeping her business success a secret. She'd built her company quietly, all on her own, without telling anyone. She thought it was better that way, to protect herself from this exact kind of moment. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Then James stepped beside Vanessa and placed a firm hand on her shoulder. He looked at her with disappointment. That's enough, Vanessa. His voice was calm but strong. He turned to Eleanor. This has gone too far. Eleanor glared at him. This is a family matter. You don't need to interfere. James didn't back down. I won't just stand here while my wife insults someone, especially someone she clearly doesn't understand. Vanessa turned toward him, confused. What are you talking about? James looked at Maggie. His eyes were serious. He leaned down and whispered in his wife's ear, "Do you know who your sister really is?" Vanessa's eyes grew wide. She looked at her husband, then turned to Maggie, stunned. Maggie stood still. She knew this moment would come someday. James knew her secret, but how? "I'm leaving," she said again, more firmly this time. She walked toward the door, but James called out, "Maggie, wait, you should tell them the truth." She turned and looked at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired. "Now isn't the time." "Then maybe I should tell them," James said, his tone firm. Eleanor frowned. "What truth? What are you saying? Maggie has a secret?" James gave a short nod, then motioned for Eleanor and Vanessa to follow him to a quiet corner of the room. They hesitated but followed. "There's something you both need to know," he said softly, "and once you hear it, you'll regret everything you've done today." Maggie stayed where she was. She noticed James's parents watching from across the room. Guests whispered among themselves, unsure of what was happening. Vanessa crossed her arms. "What is this about? She ruined my baby shower." James ignored her tone. He pulled out his phone and opened an article. "She may seem like just another office worker to you, but she's not." He held up the screen. Eleanor stared at the headline. Margaret Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Technologies, named the $3 billion woman. Eleanor's face turned pale. What is this?" James spoke slowly. "Maggie, your daughter, is the founder and CEO of Reynolds Technologies. She built the company on her own 10 years ago. It's now worth over $3 billion. Vanessa's mouth dropped open. No way, that's not possible." "It's all true," James said. "I've known about her for a while through the tech industry. I had no idea she was your sister until today." Vanessa snatched the phone and started reading the article. Her hands were shaking. "She kept this from us?" Eleanor whispered. "Probably because of how you've treated her," James replied. Eleanor slowly turned and looked at Maggie, who stood silently across the room. "Maggie," she said in a weak voice. Maggie walked over, her expression calm, but her voice firm. "You didn't have to tell them, James." "I had to," he replied. "They needed to see who you really are. My parents saw what happened today. They understand now too." His parents, Richard and Martha Williams, stepped closer. Richard looked uncomfortable. Martha looked upset. "James," Richard said, "what is all this?" "Dad, not now," James said quickly. Martha turned to Eleanor. "You hit your daughter, and for what? Because she didn't give you money, and now you find out she's one of the most powerful women in the tech world?" Eleanor didn't answer. Her lips trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know." Maggie looked at her mother. "Would it have mattered? You ignored me my whole life. You never came to my graduation. When I started my first business, you called it a cute hobby. Today, you slapped me and accused me of being selfish." Vanessa stepped forward, her face pale. "Sis, I'm sorry. If we had known." Maggie cut her off. "If you had known, what? You would have been nicer to me because I'm rich? That's not love, that's greed." Silence filled the room again. James's parents exchanged glances. "James," Richard said, "we'll head home now. We'll talk later." "Of course," James replied. Before leaving, Martha walked over to Maggie. "Ms. Reynolds, I hope we can speak again sometime. You're welcome at our home." Maggie smiled slightly. "Thank you." As guests began leaving, Eleanor sat down, looking defeated. "Maggie, why didn't you tell us?" "Would it have made a difference?" Maggie asked. "To you, I was always the invisible daughter." Eleanor tried to argue, but her voice was too weak. Vanessa sobbed. "I'm sorry, we made mistakes." Maggie looked tired. "Save it, I'm going home." But James stopped her. "Maggie, one moment." They stepped into the hallway. "I'm sorry I told them," James said, "but I couldn't stay silent anymore." "You did what you thought was right," Maggie replied. James hesitated. "I've been thinking about my marriage. After what happened today, I'm not sure I want Vanessa raising our child in that environment. I'm thinking about getting a lawyer." Maggie blinked in surprise, then nodded slowly. "Do what's best for your son." "Thank you," James said softly. "You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for." Maggie smiled gently. "Maybe this is a new beginning." 6 months later. The hallways of the Chicago family court gleamed under the morning sun. Maggie walked out of the courtroom in a black silk suit, calm and graceful. "Maggie," someone called. She turned to see James, standing with his parents. They looked relieved. "I think it was the right decision," James said. "Yes," Maggie agreed. James had filed for divorce and won custody of his newborn son, Jonathan. Maggie had testified to help him. Vanessa now had visitation every other weekend. The court said she lacked emotional stability. "How's Jonathan?" Maggie asked. "With my mom," James said. "Want to see him?" "I'd love to." In the waiting room, Martha held a sleeping baby. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked. Maggie hesitated, then gently took the baby in her arms. "Hello, Jonathan," she whispered, feeling warmth in her chest. "He's lucky to have you as an aunt," James said. "And I'm lucky to know him," Maggie smiled. "Join us for dinner?" Richard asked. "I'd like that," she replied. As they walked toward the exit, Maggie paused. Vanessa sat alone on a bench, pale and lost. Their eyes met. Maggie walked over. "Vanessa." Vanessa looked up. "What do you want?" "If you ever need help, for Jonathan's sake, just ask." Vanessa stared at her, eyes filled with tears. "Why, after everything I did?" "Because you're my sister," Maggie said softly, "and Jonathan is my nephew. Let's learn what family means, from now on." Maggie turned and walked away, finally free to be herself, surrounded by people who truly saw her. A new chapter had begun.